Welcome to Babel, Translating the Middle East, a podcast from the Middle East program at CSIS. Here on Babel, we take you beyond the headlines to take a closer look at what's happening in the Middle East and why it matters. This week on Babel, I speak with El Cid, an award-winning French-Tunisian artist whose monumental artwork blending the styles of Arabic calligraphy and graffiti is spreading in the Arab world and far beyond. His smaller works are in some of the most important museum collections around the world, but he takes special pride in his process of working with communities to select meaningful quotations to inspire his art and then to execute that artwork together. He and I discuss the cultural and political forces that shaped his artistic evolution, as well as art's role in spurring social change. Then I continue the conversation with Martin Pimentel and Natasha to discuss the ways art anchors Middle Eastern diaspora communities to their homelands and interacts with political movements across the Arab world. To translate some of what's happening in the Middle East, this is Babel. El Cid, welcome to Babel.
Thank you so much.
So you grew up outside of Paris speaking Tunisian Arabic, but not reading or writing it. And it's my understanding that you started tagging things in graffiti without any reference to Arabic. How did Arabic work its way into your graffiti?
Before even I picked the name El Cid, my real name is Fauzi, F-A-O-U-Z-I. And on the I, instead of putting a dot, I used to put Hamza. I found like a few tags like that, and then I was like, wow, that's funny. And I wanted to learn calligraphy. I discovered calligraphy when I was taking some class of Arabic, classical Arabic, how to read and write in early 2000.
And you were about 18 or so at the time.
I started at 18, but the first time I saw somebody doing calligraphy, I think it was in 2004. And I was mesmerized. I was like, this is amazing. I would love to know how you do this. And so I told the guys, you give any class? He's like, I wanted, but nobody's interested. I was like, wow. And I would love to find this guy. Really, I would love to find a way to find this guy again. It was like 20 years ago. He was an Algerian guy. And then, I was looking at calligraphy, the traditional one, without knowing there was rules and stuff. So I started like drawing, tracing letters and stuff, but without knowing everything was so conditioned and put in a box. And honestly, it was through a friend of mine, a French artist. I met him in 2007 in Montreal. And he was a graffiti artist writing his name S1 EST. And then he was revising his letters. So I'm putting 2 dots on the E, extending the bar of the T. And I was like, wow, this is insane. That's so beautiful. I wish I could do something like that. And I said, like, Fauzi, let's come back, come paint with me. And at this time, I was really into corporate job. And so I stopped painting. And so he's the one who put me back into painting, into graffiti. And I said, I would love to, but I'm not interested in, just doing like, I don't want to say Western graffiti, but graffiti as we know it, and just writing LCDLSEED. And actually, back in the days, I used to write it ELSCID. Honestly, the first time I did graffiti in Arabic, or calligraphy, I felt like Spider-Man. When you wake up during the night, the spider beats him, and then he wakes up, he's like the superpower. I think that was in me. It's so weird. It became so natural. And I really felt it. It was not difficult.
And then relatively short number of years after, right after the Tunisian Revolution in 2011, you started doing really big projects. How did you conceptualize the idea of doing large-scale public art in Tunisia and this new style that you were still in the process of developing? It doesn't seem like a sort of obvious continuation of what you have been doing before.
I was always amazed by artists who could paint a large-scale art piece. And I started by a small piece, like a small wall that you can just reach with a ladder, and then coming bigger and bigger. And then in Tunisia, like after the revolution, I didn't want to do anything right after, because for me it was too opportunistic to go after the revolution and say like, hey, look, I'm an artist, I'm painting something. I waited at least a year before coming back. Actually, a year, 365 days. I remember I came back to Tunisia. I started the project on December 17th, 2011, when actually Bouazizi passed away on the 17th of December, 2010. So I remember my first really large one, like it was a 7 meter by 40 meter. I did it in Cairo. And what I enjoyed was not actually the big scale. for me was mostly like the interaction and reaction of the people in the street. I was painting for 10 days with random people who approached me for what I was started painting. So the first day, 6 people approached me, and the 6 people, they spent 10 days with me every day from 7 to maybe 10 p.m. at night. It was crazy. It was beautiful. And actually, one of them still work with me today, 13 years later, which is insane.
You've done a lot of community related art. How do you choose communities to do public art in? And how do you engage communities when you're doing public art? And has that changed as you've done this more and more? You described doing this for the first time, and a lot of it was happenstance. Now you do it a lot.
When you involve a community in a place, they become the guardian of your artwork in a certain way. Sometimes I'm just attracted by the look of a place, and I'm like, I would love to create something there just to have an artwork with this on the background. But for example, in Nepal or in Cairo garbage collector neighborhood in Egypt, I want the work to become the amplifier of the voice of the people. And so it's important for me to have them in the artwork. And when I say have them, it's not necessarily painting. For example, in Egypt, I had like 10 members of the community who helped me that I paid. They were working with me for a month. But I'm talking about the people on your lift, somebody open the window of his house and offer you a cup of tea or some bread. For me, indirectly, they're participating, or the shops. Sometimes we go eat at lunch. Some days like, no, today's on me. That's their participation because they're encouraging my team and I to continue and to finish what we're doing. That's what is for me involving the community. It's not only like asking people to come, take a brush and fill up the color for me. I think it's beyond. It's like really a kind of collective effort to connect with the artwork.
Has that become easier or harder as you've become better known around the world?
Actually, the community where I go, people, they don't know me. So that's the funny part. So I go, and then so it's always a work of convincing people. And it depends on how you approach. I always say that in every place that I go, there is a key. And the key is like a character, a person that I meet. That would be the one who will convince everybody. In Egypt, he was a guy called Mario, who was a friend. In Nepal, it was somebody called Mohan. In Tunisia, it was somebody else, like in different places I've been. So it's always someone that will come and say, look, I think we should just take the time to listen to this guy and maybe see what he wants to do. And like every people that I've met, most of them, I say 99% of the people, I'm still in touch with them today.
Does the planning and the meeting the key individual start long before you start the work, or is it sort of organic? You go someplace, you meet some people, and the work is planned and starts and is executed in relatively short order?
It takes some time. Egypt took a year to plan. Nepal, it took me 6 months to plan. Greece, it was through people. When I did this project in a refugee camp in South Lebanon, it was through somebody who introduced me to a community of Palestinian embroiderers, like women who do like Palestinian embroidery. And so it was a real process of knowing the people, speaking on Zoom. When I did this project in Philadelphia a few years ago, I had a kind of meeting online with these 20 people. I spent first a week just having tea and coffee in everybody's house. They wanted to understand why me coming from the other side of the world, I'm going to paint in West Philadelphia, Arabic calligraphy. I was telling them it's not about the Arabic calligraphy. It's about the text that I'm using and the bridge that I'm creating. Because in Philadelphia, I was using a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, who was actually the first sociologue who wrote the social study about the Afro-American community of Philadelphia. So for me, it was like, look, I'm connecting you. And then it was important for me to say to the younger generation, we all should know about this guy who wrote this. So I was connecting my work, bridging cultures together. And then the calligraphy is just a pretext. The art piece is just a pretext. It's a tool actually to bridge culture and people and generation.
So let me first ask about the text, and then I want to ask about the bridge piece. Your work has sometimes been connected to the Hurufiyya movement, which arose in Arabic art and tried to use letters, but not to be read literally, but inspired by the shapes of letters. In fact, a lot of your art doesn't have discrete letters at all. It's not intended to be read. But on the other hand, not all of your art, but certainly the art I'm familiar with, has texts that are very clearly related to the place you're doing the work. How should we think about the connection between the words that you ascribe to a piece of art and the shapes that the artwork itself takes. Because, as I say, there aren't words themselves in the artwork.
Sometimes people that associate me to Hurufiyya when actually I'm out of Hurufiyya, because the Hurufiyya movement is people just playing with letters, not writing something. Me, I write by drawings. So even the fact of writing, it's already a way of drawing. That's how I see it. Just because we associated meaning to sign. If a C was pronounced wo, like we see it differently. It's like the way we associated sound to shapes that makes letters and words. But that's what I do. I draw those signs that make a sound, that associated they become words, and words associated become a phrase. And those phrases are always related to the place where I am. So there is a lot of documentation before I even start an artwork, because it's important for me to connect the community with the artwork and the artwork with the community. And that's how actually the community become the guardians of the artwork.
And as you think about the work you do, you start off doing principally work in the Arab world, but now you've done work on the Korean DMZ, and I have artwork in my home that's derived from some of that work. You've done work in North America, you said Philadelphia, in Africa and Asia. Do you see what you're doing as an Arab contribution to world art? Do you see your work transcending Arabness in some way and becoming universal?
What is interesting is that my work is more out of the Arab world than in the Arab world, statistically. So if I count the amount of work that I painted, or artwork, or sculpture, or canvases, my work is more out of the Arab world than in the Arab world. But Arabic script has a universal beauty that you don't need to translate. The organic shape of the letters reaches your soul before it touches your eyes. And that's why it's just a mean, it's just a tool, a medium. I'm not here to claim Arab identity. I'm here to say, like, the same way you have English writing in India or subway in South Korea, how it could bother anybody to have like something in Arabic in America or in South America or in Europe. For me, this is bringing back to this connection that we have as humans. I'm doing this so maybe you would be interested in what I do. Maybe you're going to start questioning, what is this? Once, like 2 years ago in Paris, I was part of a show in the city here, and somebody from the municipality came to me. He saw me painting the first week, and after the weekend, he came to me. He's like, I saw those diamonds that you were painting. I was talking about the nokta, the dots on the letters. He said, I love those diamonds. And I saw the same diamonds. He told me I was watching Tomb Raider on TV, and I saw the same diamond in one of her books. And I'm like, that's not diamond. I told him, I say, what you look at diamond, actually dots that are like part of letters, and this is Arabic. And then I was like, oh, wow. And then I told him the meaning of what I was writing, and he was amazed. But the beauty of this was a way to show that actually there's no translation needed. The same way when you listen to music, sometimes you listen to music from a foreign language, you don't understand, but you love the melody. And like you start singing it, and you have no idea what the person is saying, but you love it because it touches your soul. And I think this is the same effect with calligraphy.
Do you see yourself as playing the same role as world music? I mean, it's an interesting metaphor I hadn't thought about, but is that the most appropriate metaphor, do you think, for the kind of art you're creating?
Definitely. It's a visual music.
But it's interesting because, as we've discussed, your art has a very clear message that's very connected to the communities in which it's often based, which is not the way we think about music. Music, we often think about sort of universal themes, and you tend to write in particularistic ways, connecting to communities.
What you said is right, but there's one part you missed. I write messages that are relevant to a place, but have a universal dimension so everybody can relate to it. The phrase that I put in the Cairo garbage collector neighborhood, it says, anyone wants to see the sunlight clearly need to wipe his eyes first. This community are like Coptic. The guy who said the quote that I just mentioned is a Coptic bishop from Egypt who lived in the 4th century. So I take somebody from Egypt, from the Coptic culture, because I'm inside the Coptic neighborhood. So for me, it's easier to convince with them. But this quote, written by a guy in the 4th century, speak about perception. If I did perception in Peru, I would have found somebody who spoke about perception in Peru. But if I tell you anyone wants to see the sunlight clearly need to wipe his eyes first, it means if you want to see the real image of somebody, sometimes just remove the stereotype, the wrong image that you have to see the person in the right angle. And that's exactly what I meant. And we all have, like from China to the US, everybody in his life has judged somebody without knowing them, or have been judged by somebody without them knowing us. And that was the point of it. In Nepal, I wanted to talk about the resilience of women and the inspiration of how Nepali women have rebuilt their homes after the earthquake of 2015. They have created these workshops where they build earthquake-resistant bricks. They move like a Lego, so you pile them like Legos. And I wanted to use this example of this woman in Nepal to speak about women not in general. I don't like to use this word, but I use this quote from this woman who was one of the first feminists of Nepal history, contemporary feminist. She passed away in 1941. And in one of her poems, she said, "The tears in my eyes are the same as yours." But it was more profound. Like, I forgot actually the first part of the poem. The idea was that there was no difference between the feeling that you can feel and my feeling. When the tears comes, this is our humanity that are connected. Yeah, we're not the same gender, but we're together in the same fight, I would say. Anybody from France or like from Russia or South Africa will recognize himself in this.
It feels to me like much of your art came out of a revolutionary moment in the Arab world. At least your spread in the Arab world came at a revolutionary moment, a moment of profound change. How did you see other new forms of art arising, street art, graffiti throughout the Arab world? Did you feel connected to a broader set of social changes that were going on? Or as somebody who grew up in France, was it always a little bit removed from your personal experience?
My journey was a quest of identity, growing up in France, connected to my Tunisian roots, not really knowing who I was, where I wanted to go, and having this strong need to belong. My Arabity was something that I was really proud of. It came like around 16, 17 when I started claiming it. And that's why I started learning how to read and write Arabic. So it started like that and slowly grew up. And then I realized that your identity is not only one layer, it's different layers that get expressed in different ways, depending on where you are and what time of your life you are. This is how I say it. But I was seeing the rise of Arab art not as something new, because some people say, oh, graffiti in the Arabic world started in 2011 when you see people in Palestine painting on walls. There was even a book by this Swedish journalist called Graffiti that was speaking about wars in Palestine in the 60s or 70s, at the same time of the rise of graffiti in the US. For me, like, it was just being part of a movement and just being the continuity of something that I started. And the way I was doing it was maybe different that people would seen it before, because my approach was really coming from an identity crisis. So my expression was different and totally singular in my way, but I believe some other people express themselves in different ways. We're not coming from the same circumstances. So that's why there's not one type of Arab art in a certain way, but I think a various one.
It feels like in many ways the political moment of the Arab world has moved on. You've remained, it seems to me, very involved in issues of social change, issues of community. How do you see social change evolving in the Middle East and the Arab world as an artist who thinks about communities and the way communities work and art's role in communities? What's art's role in social change and the social change that's going on now?
The issue that we have, when I say we, I speak in the Western world, in the Arab world, or everywhere around the world, is the fact that art speaks to our emotion. And we live in a world where we want to quantify everything. And we don't have the capacity of quantifying or measuring success of an art piece, or like the impact of an art piece. How do you measure like pride? How do you measure love and courage? How do you measure happiness? This is impossible. And people, they forget that. A marginalized neighborhood, and you create an art piece, and then people, they feel more proud. What's the impact that this has? You cannot measure it, but you just know that people are like, hey, we feel so proud to have this. And I think sometimes in the higher sphere, people, they don't see that. Something that you cannot quantify and measure sometimes has less value into people. When value doesn't rely on the monetary or financial impact, it's more something intangible that you cannot grasp. And that's how I see it on my side, as an artist.
How do you see your art evolving now? Where do you want your art to be in another 10 years?
I don't want to control that. I love to be influenced and inspired by things that I'm not even expecting. Sometimes you meet people and you speak with them and they just inspire you in a way that you wouldn't even think of it. So I love it and I just want to follow the flow. I have like so many projects that I want to do and I hope I will be able to make them. And then hopefully they will inspire other people as well.
Alcide, thank you very much for joining us on Babel.
No, thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Alcide talked about how his identity as a Tunisian French citizen changed as he learned to read and write Arabic as an adult and as his art evolved. How similar or dissimilar is this experience to other artists and members of the diaspora?
I think what's interesting is how Alcide views this combination of art, but also his mother tongue, to connect to people in his adulthood, and how that compares to many of the artists that I've worked with who grew up in the region and then moved or were displaced more recently to the Western world or other countries. My experience is closer to Alcide's. I think Arabic for both of us was kind of in the background, songs that our mothers sang to us, but it was only as adults that we really chose our identities and really connected more deeply with culture and identity. And for Alcide, that was through art as well. But I've also seen the reverse. So I've seen how those more recently in the diaspora use art to share their experience and to connect to the foreign communities that they're in now. And I think one of the reasons for that is that art is a really good medium because it fills the spaces of broken language barriers. Music and art is a more forgiving medium than spoken and written language in, let's say, a think tank or academia or any other profession, really. So I think in each case, whether it's the diaspora going to the motherland or a newly immigrated person, there's this tendency to want to show your audience where you come from at first. That makes sense because Alcide's work started in the Arab world, and many Arab artists that recently fled conflict or moved also started with creating art, at least in my experience, that depicted their culture, their experiences in their home country. And I'm using a broad brush here from fine art to music to film and fiction. But they often emerge as sort of refugee artists or diaspora artists or Tunisian artists, but soon they want to simply be seen as artists, sort of telling a human story that happens to be theirs, but they hope it connects to people in a more emotional and sort of human way.
What I thought was really interesting was the way he talked that there were just like little symbols, small elements of Arabic identity, putting like two dots over things. And that merged with the universal message of art. Art transcends direct language. And it really provided a pathway, I think, in a really interesting way to create something that is both universal and particularistic. And art, whether it's visual art or music, gives you an opportunity to do that the written word necessarily doesn't. And I thought that the way he described that process was quite interesting, quite revealing.
In the interview, Alcide's move toward public art seemed intimately tied to the Arab Spring and the Tunisian Revolution, but his messages seem anything but revolutionary. How should we understand that?
I felt like his view of engaging with communities was almost a model for how governments should do it. And rather than confronting governments, he's modeling government engagement. It was very interesting to me when he talked about how he worked with community leaders to select quotations that were meaningful to the community. They're not really to be read, but they're meant to inspire the art and inspire the community to see the quotation when they see the art. That's not the way Arabic calligraphy traditionally works. You're not supposed to necessarily have to know the quotation to make sense of it. It is hard to pick out more than a few letters in Arabic from his calligraphy, even though it's clearly Arabic informed, Arabic inspired. But I'm not aware of any other artist who either has explicit quotations that are associated with each piece of art, or who seems to have a process to embed a piece of art in a community, to have this sort of artist community dialogue that precedes the artwork, which again is I think, for somebody who grew up in seeing Tunisia as an authoritarian system, I think it's a model for a different kind of government engagement that the artwork provides a pathway toward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it wasn't, or his work is not revolutionary. One of his first large-scale murals in Tunisia, a year after the revolution, was a passage from a Tunisian poem, and it was dedicated to those struggling against tyranny and injustice. But that said, I agree with Jon here. I think that what El Cid is trying to do in Tunisia and other parts of the Arab world and in the world more broadly is reconnect with people over shared culture in spite of divisive politics. In other parts of the world, he's tried to connect with people over a shared humanity. But that can also be revolutionary. Connecting people gives them power, which is why I think murals are so tightly regulated. In Syria, you needed an ID to get a spray paint can in the early days of the revolution. So having something on a wall that people see on a daily basis that they interact with, especially the way that El Cid does it, which is in this communal way, can be, I think, a revolutionary aspect of his art. I started an organization called Art in Exile a few years ago. We put on art exhibitions and film screenings and had talks and parties and live paintings. But the big part of it was really connecting people who were in DC that might be being moved because of gentrification or something, and connecting them with refugee artists, this sort of shared humanity, shared experiences through art, which I think is a really powerful tool. And he's also done this in the demilitarized zone in North and South Korea. I think it's sort of human nature to want to break down barriers or paint over them when they can't.
El Cid is using art to give particular Arab forms a universal appeal. Is this push for universality common in the Arab art world? And where do we see these efforts taking place?
It definitely is. Artists, like all people, are just trying to connect. I think it's a fine line between universal appeal and maintaining your uniqueness as an artist, but I've seen quite a few, in particular Syrian artists. They start as Syrian artists. They start as revolutionary artists. A lot of people might be familiar with Tamam Azam. He became mostly famous for this piece, Freedom Graffiti, where he overlays Gustav Klimt's famous work, The Kiss, on a building ravaged by conflict. So he's trying to connect with people in this universal image that people remember and know, this famous painting, and put it over something of his experience. But since then, him and many other artists that I've worked with, Sadafa Hijazi, Khaled Akil, they've gone from sort of Syrian art, Syrian cultural work on the conflict, to things that have much more universal appeal. But I think their instinct at first was to really connect with people, show them who they are, before they got to that second layer of more universal appeal.
There was an initial effort by Arab artists to imitate European artists. And I think there have been many, many more sophisticated efforts to integrate art and to take it in new directions. And I think there's openness. We see this, by the way, in music as well. There's Arabic fusion music. And some of my favorite includes Arabic music fused with Latin music. We're seeing it in all kinds of ways. We see that in the United States. Jazz and rock and roll and the blues are all African music themes that have worked their way in. I think we're seeing it in increasingly sophisticated ways coming out of the Arab world, coming out of Iran. It's not just derivative, it's additive. And I think some of the things that are happening are extraordinarily creative. They're very, very interesting. And they genuinely do have universal appeal. And that's very exciting. And I think it's very enriching. There's a lot of very, very cool things coming out.
I would just say that I think what's really beautiful in particular about El Cid's work, and I liked his comparison to music in this regard, is that he made something uniquely Arab, Arabic calligraphy, have greater universal appeal and familiarity to people. People now in Lyon and Philly and Toronto, now they see Arabic calligraphy as something that adds life and dignity to their communities. He made the Arabic language, or at least Arabic script, have universal appeal in a way that only music could before. And that's really important in a way because music is part of our lives. It's the thing that triggers memories the most. Murals are part of our daily lives. We walk past them all the time. And I think that that touches the soul in a way that few other things can. I worked quite a lot over the years with artists from Yarmouk camp in particular, and right outside of Damascus. And the Syrian regime sort of besieged and bombarded this place to smithereens. But in the midst of it all, this photographer I worked for snapped a picture of Ayham Ahmed, this pianist who used to roll his piano out in this devastated neighborhood and play and sing. And as he did, the neighborhood and the young and the old used to come out to join him. And, you can see these videos online. You don't have to speak Arabic to be inspired by how this communal act formed this place that was undignified by bombing and starvation. And, now he plays for audiences all over Europe. So I think that there's this beauty in art in a way that we can't really accomplish at a think tank, unfortunately, sometimes.
And of course, one of his most prominent pieces of art is in the garbage collectors neighborhood in Cairo, covering more than 50 buildings in a way that was meant to raise up a community that he felt was looked down upon. There is a political message, there's a social message, and there's an artistic message. And to bring all of those things, and there's a religious message, because the way to see this art, to conceptualize it, you have to be sitting in a monastery in the Muqattam Hills. To wrap all those things together and in some ways transcend language is just such a remarkable act of imagination, which is really where art tries to take us.
Jon, Natasha, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marty.
Thanks for listening to Babel. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find more analysis on this topic linked in the show notes on the CSIS website, and you can find us on Twitter at CSIS Mideast.